Welcome to the Three Championship Drive podcast on YouTube, hosted by me, Lance Caporossi. Follow me on X at Lance Caporossi, the same way you see it spelled on the screen. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, like the video, but more importantly, tell a Pistons fan. No Zach this week. I'm recording a little bit later in the week. He didn't have the time to jump on with me for today's recording, and that's fine. I used to do this by myself. I like a new challenge. I haven't done it in a while. I think fans of the show maybe just want to hear my voice from time to time. I'm going to keep it short. I'm not going to keep it too long. I'm a little bit, just got back from a wedding. So, I'm a little bit less prepared than I normally am. But, for most of you out there, you probably want to be able to tell. So, the Detroit Pistons, they might be done with Jaden Ivey. According to Eric Pincus, he issued a statement earlier this week, and it says people around the league have speculated that the Detroit Pistons aren't fully sold on Jaden Ivey. Some around the league speculate that the Pistons aren't sold on Ivy, but there's no compelling reason yet to think he's moved. Instead, Detroit may be looking to move veterans to add young players and draft considerations. Several teams would be interested in Isaiah Stewart, who has a friendly $60 million contract over the next 4 seasons with a player option. So, my first question is, do I believe the Pistons are out on Jaden Ivey? And this is a tough one because if you've been listening to the show, you know that I have thought the Detroit Pistons were done with Jaden Ivey pretty much since the season ended. I have been saying for a while now, I just don't love the fit with Cade Cunningham between the two. I do know they had a little cup of coffee for like 5 games where they were really both showing out. I don't think that 5 game streak where Cade was averaging 33 and Jaden Ivey was averaging 18. I don't know if they won any games, but they did look dynamic, but it's just too small of a sample size for me. I've been watching both of these guys since they came into the league, and I was all for the Detroit Pistons drafting Jaden Ivey with the 5th pick. I thought he would be the lightning to Cade's thunder. I thought it was going to be a match made in basketball heaven. Unfortunately, due to injuries, incompetent coaching, we really haven't been able to see if these two can make it work. But when we have seen them on the floor, it has been an awkward fit. So I, I do believe Jaden Ivey's time in Detroit is coming to a close. I do believe that. I don't believe it's going to happen this season. Now, it might, maybe Trajan Langdon and JB Bickerstaff say, you know what, let's give this like 3 or 4 months. Let's see if these guys can make it work. And if they can't make it work in that time and it's now working and the writing's on the wall, then yeah, then Jaden Ivey's out the door. Because at the end of the day, you're on Cade's timeline. This is Cade's team. You have to build around him if you want him to stay here long term. You have to make it work with Cade Cunningham. And if you can't make it work with Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham, you're not trading Cade Cunningham. You're getting rid of Jaden Ivey. That's just what's going to happen. But I do think this year is a prove it year. I do think they're just going to let's see these young guys. Let's see how they work with veterans. Let's see them work under JB Bickerstaff. Let's see if they can get some momentum going. And let's see if there's a bright future with these guys. That is what I think you're going to get out of this year. And to the Pistons fans that want to blame Monty Williams and Troy Weaver, dude, I'm right there with you. The way they handled Jaden Ivey last season, they should not have jobs in the NBA. It was pathetic, and it was just a poor excuse of coaching. Using Jaden Ivey as the 11th man, playing him under 25 minutes per game, starting Killian Hayes over him because Killian Hayes brought quote unquote defense and playmaking, whatever. He didn't generate enough offense. It was show me someone that didn't care about their job as much as Monty Williams didn't care about his job. And I hope Monty Williams, I'm just going to say it, hope he never gets another chance in the NBA again. I hope all of the owners and the executives talk and they just say, look, this dude, he did not care. He clearly didn't care. And we're not going to give him another shot. He doesn't deserve it because we don't want him running our basketball team the way he ran it in Detroit. That was a disgrace to the logo, into the NBA brand. It was just a disgrace. So again, I don't blame you for pointing the finger at Monty Williams. He misused Jaden Ivey, and it was pathetic. I had said when I was on another Pistons podcast that if they were going to continue to use Jaden Ivey the way they used him, you had to trade him. It was just it was just a disgrace. You couldn't keep playing him as the 11th man, bringing him off the bench, sticking him in the corner and asking him to play to his weaknesses versus his strengths. Monty just did a disservice to him, and it was just a bad thing to watch. So let me go back to the original question. Do I think they are out on Jaden Ivey? I don't think they're entirely out on Jaden Ivey because, again, he was misused under Monty Williams. JB Bickerstaff seems to be excited about the two guards and staggering their minutes to try to maximize their strengths and their play styles. So I think if you're Trajan Langdon and you hear that press conference and you're having these talks with JB Bickerstaff, you're probably like, you know what, dude, if this guy's excited about the guards, let me just let me do let him do his job. Let me just view it all. Let me see what he needs, but maybe he can finally get these two on the same wavelength and see if they can really maximize their strengths together. And if that's what JB Bickerstaff can, then I think you see Jaden Ivey here for a long time. And I think he signs another contract. I just I'll be honest, I just don't see it. I've said it plenty of times before, but let me give you another reason why the Detroit Pistons wouldn't be out on Jaden Ivey right this minute, and they might give it to the end of this season. Jaden Ivey, it's like so many other players before him, hasn't found his stride in the NBA yet. He hasn't emerged. Look at the most recent example, Kobe White. This is a guy that was basically written off by the Chicago Bulls. And then he had a fantastic last season where he's averaging 19, 4, and 4, I believe. I don't have the numbers pulled up in front of me. But he emerged as a guy, maybe not a franchise player, but a cornerstone, a pillar, something that he can be a piece to the puzzle to help you actually build a winning organization. That is what Kobe White showed. The Detroit Pistons, they won a championship with a late bloomer in Chauncey Billups. That guy, he was on his way out of the NBA. And then Joe Dumars brought him in and he became a finals MVP and became one of the best guards in the NBA. It happens. Look at Kyle Lowry. He might end up in the Hall of Fame. And he was written off. He wasn't a lottery pick, but he was written off early in his career. Look at Malik Monk. I thought he was going to be a journeyman. I thought he would end up being a two-way or a 10-day guy at some point because he was done in Charlotte. He went to LA. Then he finally found a home in Sacramento where he recently signed a long-term deal. It does happen. That's why I'm telling myself and telling all of you, Jaden Ivey's not going to be traded right this moment because they very much want to see what they can have. Maybe they can unlock something. Maybe, Jaden Ivey does become a player. Maybe he becomes Victor Oladipo. When everything clicked, he became an all-star in the NBA and looked like he was on the way to having a very bright future before injuries took over. Maybe that can happen. I think getting rid of Jaden Ivey at this moment and not letting this season play out would be premature, and it would be another disservice to us fans, to Cade Cunningham. But I'm telling you right now, if we get 25 games into the season and that fit is still awkward, Jaden Ivey's going to have to pack his bags and he will be playing for another team. I think that's definitely what is going to happen with the Detroit Pistons. I know I've been talking in circles and ranting on and off about, Jaden Ivey and everything, but I promise you there is a point to it. This is why I need Zach here to, calm me down a little bit and to jump in on some of these rants to break them up and allow me to collect my thoughts. That's why he's so integral to what we're doing over here. So last week, Zach and I talked about Karl Anthony Towns and his fit on the Detroit Pistons. If you remember, I talked about a Bleacher Report article that named every NBA team's top 3 dream targets. I'm going to continue that conversation by bringing up the second player on their list, and that is Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram is a very talented basketball player that would help the Detroit Pistons and give Cade Cunningham a true sidekick. I say a sidekick because Brandon Ingram has been a 20-plus point scorer in the NBA for 5 seasons. If the Pistons are looking for someone to score the ball, there's not anyone better on the trade market right now than Brandon Ingram. Maybe Zach LaVine. The same thing about those two players is that they're both you're not going to get 82 games out of him. But Brandon Ingram, a very good player. I know some people complain about his, other than his injuries, they complain about his 3-point shooting. But if you go back to his first season in New Orleans when he was playing with Drew Holiday, I know he had already been playing with Lonzo Ball in Los Angeles, but that was also Lonzo Ball's, I believe, fourth season in the NBA. He had matured as a guard. They found ways to get Brandon Ingram 3-point shot attempts. And on the catch and shoot, he's very good. I think playing with a point guard like Cade Cunningham would get him back to taking more threes. That's why I want Brandon Ingram here, because there's you're only seeing a certain part of his game because he had to take on more playmaking, a more of a playmaking role in New Orleans because they didn't have a true point guard. But if you look at his numbers when they started doing the drive and kick with Zion Williamson, the 3-point shots were still going up from Brandon Ingram. He needs someone to create those open looks for himself because this guy loves to operate in the mid range. You can give him the ball, and when the defense sags off, he'll pull up. I mean, it will be inside the arc. But if you have him playing with a point guard like Cade Cunningham, who is somewhat of a playmaker like Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram will get 3-point shots up, 3-point shot ups. I believe that number would go up playing with a point guard like Cade Cunningham. I think if you took less playmaking responsibilities away from Brandon Ingram, you'd see more of a complete scorer. I just think he was asked to do too much in New Orleans. And maybe you want that out of a guy that can make 200 million. I don't know. But in Detroit, there would be less responsibility for him to play make because you are playing with Cade Cunningham. You are playing with Jaden Ivey. You are playing with even Jalen Duren, who can, like we talked about last week, he can create a little bit. He had 28 games, I believe, with 3 or more assists per game. In 8 of those wins, he was averaging at least 4, almost 5 assists per game. Yeah, he can even create some open looks from Brandon Ingram. I think Brandon Ingram would thrive in Detroit just because there are more playmakers there. And I'm willing to bet anybody that Brandon Ingram playing alongside DeJounte Murray in New Orleans, that is going to open things up for him because he's finally playing with a true point guard again, just like he was his first year in New Orleans when he was named most improved and an all-star. I don't really have a lot on Brandon Ingram. Really, the negatives are just the injuries. He doesn't shoot enough threes. You would like to see him use that length to attack the rim a little bit more instead of just always operating in the mid range. But again, I just think if you're either he's playing with a disciplined coach like he was with Stan Van Gundy and Alvin Gentry. Those guys were really trying to get him to maximize the outside shot, which I believe they did when they were in New Orleans. Unfortunately, it just didn't result in a lot of wins. But I think with someone like JB Bickerstaff, who I wouldn't say he's the most creative coach in the NBA, but he definitely has some creative sets where he's getting guys moving. That's another complaint of Brandon Ingram's in mine. He doesn't move without the ball a ton. You want to see him do that. But I do think he could do that with a JB Bickerstaff and a Cade Cunningham. I think we would see a different version of Brandon Ingram, who is aware. He even said, I found this quote online. I thought it was really interesting. I'm going to pull it up here. He has this quote where he says, "I know who I am. In ways I can get stuck and think my way is the best way." And when I read that, that's a guy that's very self-aware. That's a guy that's saying, "Yeah, I've been doing it my way. I've had success my way, but there are other ways of playing the game of basketball that, maybe I've acknowledged, but I really haven't tried to change my game to fit those new ways. And maybe if I did, I would find more success and I would be a $200 million earner in the NBA." But I looked at some trades and there's not a whole lot with the Detroit Pistons because you can't trade Tim Hardaway, you can't trade Malik Beasley, you can't trade Wendell Moore. They are guys you cannot use with other players to make trades. You probably have to find a third team to bring them in. Again, I don't think Trajan Langdon does this at the beginning of the season or even at the trade deadline. I think Trajan sees how this roster works together and assesses what they need at the end of the season. And that's maybe when you do get a Brandon Ingram coming in to Detroit. Maybe Trajan says, you know what? I've seen this guy operate in New Orleans. I've seen what he could do with a real point guard. I see what he can do with a good head coach. I have a good head coach. I have a legit point guard. I have a guy that likes to create for others in Cade Cunningham. Let me bring in Brandon Ingram. I think if we do get Brandon Ingram news of him coming to Detroit, it's going to happen after the season, after just a year of growth and development, and just to see what we have with this young Detroit Pistons. I want to thank you guys for listening to the Three Championship Drive podcast. There is no Pistons trivia tonight because Zach is not on the screen or on the podcast with me. We'll get back to that when me and him record again. I have a great question for him, but I'm not going to ask it now because I know he'll check out the podcast and then he'll hear the question and then he'll find the answer. And I don't want him to cheat. I really don't. I like surprising him with the questions. I also just want to thank you guys for bearing with me as I did this solo because I haven't done it in a long time and I clearly love the sound of my own voice. Let's just be honest. But again, thank you guys for listening to the Three Championship Drive podcast. Do me a favor, go to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hit the follow button. After you hit the follow button, rate with five stars. Leave a review by dropping your own Pistons trivia. Maybe I'll read it on the podcast for you guys and give you a shout out. But more importantly, tell a Pistons fan